no miracle has occurred. But maybe, just maybe, the lettuce is working. Section 1. Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to the gaslit streets of Victorian London, where chimneys puff like dragons, corsets creak ominously, and tea flows stronger than most political movements. But we're not here for revolution or empire tonight. We're here for sleep. More specifically, we're here for a strange and gentle little footnote in history, how proper Victorian housewives flitting about their candlelit parlors and fainting sofas tried to cure their insomnia with lettuce soup. You'll trail through rooms scented faintly of lavender and coal dust into kitchens where broth simmers beside anxious scribbles and sleep diaries. And yes, you'll eventually find yourself sipping a very soft, very soggy bowl of warm lettuce water. And let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive this lifestyle. The plumbing alone is a waking nightmare. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is as you drift off. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in a narrow lane in Kensington around the year 1872. The gas lights above you hiss faintly, their glow caught in the mist. It's the kind of fog that clings to your shawl and smells vaguely of ash and biscuits. You hear the soft clip of a carriage horse up ahead, a muffled bark somewhere beyond the mews. Around you, the world is falling asleep, but not you. Not yet. You are the mistress of one of the better terraced homes on this block. It's not quite a mansion, but it boasts a drawing room with 2 potted ferns and an upstairs maid. The walls are tastefully wallpapered, the carpets thick enough to silence your husband's pacing boots. And still you cannot sleep. In fact, it's a bit of an epidemic. Victorian doctors, particularly in London, begin to notice that women of a certain class and disposition, educated, idle, tightly corseted, are all increasingly reporting the same problem. Long nights of restlessness, disturbed dreams, fatigue with no fever. Some called it female nerves, others neurasthenia, and still others just called it what it was, insomnia. In a world without screen time, you might assume sleep would come easier, but it's not so simple. As you sit up in bed, head propped on a bolster pillow, staring at the dark wooden beams above you, your mind is still alert. Perhaps you're thinking about the grocery bill, or the fact that you haven't received a letter from your sister in Bath. Or maybe you're simply wondering quietly, guiltily, whether you've been too harsh to the scullery maid. You slip on a soft dressing gown, blue flannel with delicate ruffles, and pad quietly down the hallway. A grandfather clock ticks steadily below. Somewhere something creaks. You reach the drawing room where the fire has died, but the warmth lingers faintly. And it's here we meet the first of many sleep seekers, women like Lady Charlotte Howard, who wrote in her journal that the moon rises with a silver eye and still I lie awake plagued by trivialities. Or Margaret Burleigh, whose household staff reported she would walk circles around the dining table in her stocking feet at 3 a.m., whispering verses from Psalms. Historians still argue whether Victorian sleeplessness was biological, psychological, or simply a performance of class, the privilege to complain about sleep being, after all, not afforded to factory girls or chimney sweeps. But for now you are very much awake, and very much in need of something warm and gentle. In the kitchen there is a pot, a well-loved thing slightly warped at the rim. You consider the usual suspects: milk tea, perhaps a little barley water, but instead you reach for a head of romaine. Yes, lettuce. Not for a salad, not tonight. For sleep. The idea has begun to circulate in polite society, perhaps from a household manual or some curious herbalist's tale, that lettuce, particularly when boiled, contains a soporific compound that soothes the mind. The logic is as limp as the greens themselves, but you'll try anything. And really, it's not so far-fetched. Modern science would later confirm that lettuce contains lactucarium, a milky substance with mild sedative effects. It's nowhere near a sleeping pill, of course, but for a Victorian mind predisposed to believe it's more than enough. You rinse the leaves. You slice them coarsely. You drop them into a pot with a little water, perhaps a sliver of onion, a dash of salt. The smell is faintly earthy, faintly absurd. While it simmers, you lean against the wood-paneled wall. The clock ticks. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard moans under the weight of someone else's insomnia. You spoon the soup into a shallow porcelain bowl. It looks like pond water with none of the grace. But you sip. Slowly. Warmth spreads through your chest. There are no fireworks, no sudden nodding off. But the ritual itself, the warm liquid, the quiet hush, the feeling that you are doing something has power. In the background, a dog howls. You can almost laugh. And now you feel it. A yawn. A real one. Your body, tired of its own theater, is beginning to relent. You shuffle back upstairs, your candle casting strange shadows across the stair rail. Your bedroom smells faintly of chamomile from the handkerchief you keep tucked beneath your pillow. You slide under the heavy woolen blanket. The house creaks again. This time it sounds sleepy too. Avoid late suppers, novels of a lurid nature, or discussion of politics after sunset. A calm mind invites restful slumber. You close the book. It's helpful in the way a sugar cube is helpful during an avalanche. Still, you try. In this pantry, you experiment with dried chamomile warmed cider, even milk thickened with rice. You even consider a spoonful of goose fat, an old remedy passed down from your grandmother's Scottish housemaid who swore it weighed down the thoughts. And yet the lettuce continues to call to you. By late afternoon, you feel your eyelids droop, not from rest, but routine exhaustion. The effort of holding yourself upright, corseted, and polite wears on you more than the housework. You long for that moment when the fire crackles low, when you can loosen the stays of your gown and let your body sag into evening. But you know better than to nap. No, napping, the books insist, is the thief of nighttime rest. So you rouse yourself, sip more tea, caffeine be damned, and read aloud to your niece from a dull volume on botany. You mispronounce angiosperm, and she giggles. You smile too. You'll later wonder if this soft moment of laughter helped more than the soup ever did. The servants begin to prepare the house for night. Candles are trimmed. Water is carried upstairs in heavy porcelain pitchers. Your husband retires to the study, where he'll likely snore in his chair after reading exactly one page of the Times. You, on the other hand, must perform the elaborate ballet of readiness. Your room smells faintly of violets and starch. You unpin your hair with deliberate slowness. Each pin clinks into the ceramic dish like a tiny bell of release. You brush, and brush, and brush. 100 strokes, not for vanity, but for stillness. There's something in this repetition, this domestic mantra, that soothes. You begin to think that perhaps sleep isn't a destination, but a ritual sacrifice, a surrender. You slip into your nightdress, cool and cotton soft, and step barefoot onto the rug. You pause at the window and peer out. The fog is still there, wrapping the street like a wet scarf. A cat slinks across the cobblestones. Somewhere a lamplighter coughs. Downstairs, you ladle out another helping of the strange green broth. You've added a hint of nutmeg this time. You don't know why, it just feels like a sleepy spice. You sip slowly, standing in the silence. The kitchen clock ticks behind you. The warmth settles into your belly, less like a sedative and more like a lullaby sung to your stomach. Your mind, still alert, begins to lose focus, drifting toward soft thoughts, rain on slate rooftops, the smell of old books, the feel of warm hands folding linen. You carry your empty bowl to the scullery and return upstairs, your candle bobbing gently in the gloom. You pause at your doorway as if afraid to break the spell. Tonight maybe it will work. Section 2. You wake not fully rested, but not entirely exhausted either. What the Victorians might call respectably weary. The fog outside hasn't lifted and your morning tea arrives lukewarm as always. But last night's soup experiment lingers in your thoughts like a whisper of drowsy success. There is a rhythm to your day now, and sleep, or the pursuit of it, is part of that rhythm. As the mistress of the household, you preside over an intricate clockwork of chores, menus, and polite half-smiles. Behind the velvet drapes and stiff upholstery lies a world of endless planning laundry, done in scalding water correspondence penned in looping script, and meals arranged like clockwork rituals. Yet even amid all this order, sleep remains disorderly. You retreat to the morning room, its windows fogged slightly from the fire. A maid pokes at the coals, and you watch soot spiral upward like smoke signals to nowhere. Outside, a milk cart trundles past, and in that soft, rattling rhythm you hear the mockery of those who do sleep. Coachmen, dock workers, even the dog lying belly up by the hearth. You pick up your daily planner, a stiff, leather-bound thing, and glance at your health and habits column. Last night's entry reads, retired at 11:30. Lettuce broth, read Psalms, slept intermittently. Dream of umbrellas. You chuckle softly. Your handwriting is beginning to lean. The edges of your notes always seem slightly more unhinged when you've had little rest. The daily rhythms of a Victorian house are predictable, but inside your mind a quiet war wages on between fatigue and restlessness. You follow a strict routine not out of discipline, but hope. Breakfast is at 8:15, tea at 4, Hurrah prayers by 9:30. You even time your walks precisely 27 minutes around the square, weather permitting. Every detail a gentle lure meant to trick your brain into slumber later. But still at night your thoughts bloom like poisonous flowers. Historians still argue whether Victorian insomnia was a response to modernity itself. The pace of life was quickening. Trains were slicing through countryside. Telegraph wires buzzed with silent, invisible chatter. Women once confined to the drawing room were beginning to read more, write more, think more. And with thought inevitably came wakefulness. You flip through your household guidebook, one of those thick volumes written by anonymous matrons with suspiciously cheerful prose. In a section titled "The Nervous Wife," you read, "You shift under the covers. Your body is heavy, but your brain is a hyperactive child tugging at your sleeve. You know you shouldn't, but you light the candle again and reach for your bedside book. Not a novel too stimulating, not poetry too evocative. Tonight you reach for your favorite A Compendium of Moral and Domestic Remedies, printed 1849, leather-bound, and heavy enough to crush an opium bottle. You flip through its yellowing pages with gentle fingers. Sleeplessness, it declares, may be remedied by moderate activity before sundown, warm foot baths, and the ingestion of soporific vegetables such as lettuce or celery. Beware overly fanciful fiction or gossip late in the day. You smirk. Celery. You imagine gnawing on a cold stalk like a squirrel and shudder. Historians still argue whether lettuce was genuinely believed to contain mystical sleep powers, or if it was just the most benign thing available in a world full of truly terrifying medical options. After all, some Victorian doctors were prescribing morphine and arsenic to treat everything from melancholy to menstrual cramps. Compared to that, your soup seems downright wholesome. Still, there was something romantic about the way lettuce appeared in herbals, its soft leaves, its watery bite. Ancient writers like Pliny the Elder swore by it. Even Galen the Roman physician claimed it cooled the blood and cleared the head. And Victorian ladies eager to cling to any remedy that didn't involve leeches or electrotherapy clung to it too. You place the book back on your nightstand and sigh. The candle hisses faintly, then goes dark. This time you lie on your side knees tucked gently upward, one arm under the pillow. You breathe in and out. You focus on the sounds, the ticking of the clock, the muffled scrape of a cat outside, the faintest hum from the wind brushing the chimney pots. And something shifts. Sleep begins not with the crash, but a soft slippage like silk sliding from a shoulder. Your thoughts stretch and fade the way sugar dissolves in tea. Images come: your old schoolroom, the smell of ink, your father's orchard dappled with light, a forgotten melody you haven't hummed in years. You are almost there. But of course, almost is not asleep. The clock strikes 2. You open one eye. You know better than to check the time, but you do it anyway. The fire in the grate has gone cold. The room is colder too. You pull the blanket higher over your shoulder and squeeze your eyes shut. And that's when it hits you. The ridiculousness of it all. Here you are, a grown woman lying in a Victorian bedroom after a bowl of boiled salad water, trying to will yourself into unconsciousness while imagining Roman doctors. You let out a breath, half sigh, half laugh, and that strangely helps. The absurdity of it. The gentle, sleepy comedy of your efforts. There's comfort in knowing you're not alone. That countless women across this fog-draped city in drawing rooms and nurseries and maids' quarters are also tossing gently in their beds, wondering if boiled lettuce is really the key to a good night's rest. One upstairs neighbor swears by valerian root. Another drinks gin. Your cousin in Sussex claims she falls asleep to the ticking of a metronome. And Lady Grenville, never one to let modesty get in the way of a good story, once confessed to sleeping only when her feet were buried in hot sand and a maid read aloud from the census. Whatever works. You turn onto your other side, trying not to disturb the cat who has now jumped onto your feet. He purrs, steady rumbling, indifferent to your plight. You envy him deeply. You close your eyes again and think about tomorrow's dinner. Roast pigeon, perhaps. A cold pudding. You'll need more carrots. But even as the grocery list forms in your head, you feel it coming again. That slow unraveling of thought, the softening of tension behind your eyes. This time maybe, just maybe, sleep will win. Section 3. The candle flickers as you close the door behind you. Your bedroom is a little sanctuary of soft shadows, quiet textiles, and ritual. The lace curtains sway slightly, catching the draft from the sash window that never quite shuts properly. On the vanity, your mother's brooch gleams in the candlelight. You've placed a pressed sprig of lavender beside it, not for show but for scent, the same way you tuck dried rose petals into your pillowcase. You sit on the edge of the bed, letting your slippers fall to the floor with a soft thud. The blanket is already folded back neatly, thank your upstairs maid for that, and your pillow fluffed with near military precision. You lie back with the delicacy of someone hoping not to wake their own thoughts. And for a moment, you lie there, eyes open, staring at the ceiling rose. The lettuce soup isn't a miracle. It doesn't knock you out like chloroform, but it's become part of the game, this gentle chess match between routine and rest, a sleepy little superstition. You count backward from 100. You recite bits of poetry. You imagine distant places. Somewhere in your mind, a camel plods across a red desert carrying jars of rosewater to a Persian market. You're not sure where the image came from, but it's pleasant, soothing. And then your mind betrays you. Did you forget to remind the cook that the butcher shorted you on suet again? Did the laundress shrink your muslin chemise? Was your reply to Mrs. Sanderson too curt? Was it curt enough? Section 4. You awaken not because of noise, but because of the absence of it. The silence is too clean, too expectant, as if the house is holding its breath. The fire has long since gone out, and your limbs ache slightly from holding still too long in an awkward, half-curled pose. Outside, the faintest shade of blue has begun to wash the sky. Dawn, of course, always arrives just when you've managed to fall asleep. The cat has vanished. So has the warmth of your soup-induced stupor. But instead of frustration, you feel something oddly close to pride. You did sleep, even if just for a stretch. A victory. Small, pale, lettuce-flavored, but yours nonetheless. You swing your legs over the side of the bed, the floorboards cool beneath your toes, and begin your morning again. You know by now that insomnia doesn't just haunt the night. It lingers, floats behind you like a trailing shawl, influencing how your thoughts take shape, how your mouth forms words, how you butter your bread. Breakfast is quiet as always. Your husband, already hidden behind his newspaper, gives a distracted hum when you pour his tea. You do not mention your night. He would not understand the war fought quietly beneath a lace coverlet with a soup spoon as your sword. And besides, he slept like a stone. Today your first task is correspondence. You settle in at your writing desk and begin sorting the pile invitations to decline thank you notes to compose a half-finished letter to your cousin in York. In that letter you add a postscript, tried the lettuce broth again, slight improvement. Dreamed of an orchestra made entirely of spoons. There's a strange comfort in these little admissions. You suspect your cousin, who spends much of her time convincing herself she enjoys her healthful marriage to a tax collector, is in the same battle. Her last note described trying to bore herself to sleep by memorizing train schedules. You understand. You once tried reading Burke on taxation. You made it 2 pages. You glance at the grandfather clock in the hallway. Nearly 10. The house begins to stir. A maid shuffles up the stairs with linens. A faint clang of pans signals. The cook's mood, slightly annoyed, and the neighbor's coughing fit begins on schedule. Victorian households are nothing if not symphonies of routine. But amidst all the precision, your own private sleep experiments feel like delightful little acts of rebellion. Somewhere between your mid-morning tonic and your second inspection of the silver, you make a plan tonight. You will try the lettuce again, this time with warm barley toast and a whisper of nutmeg. You have become in a way your own physician. Historians still debate whether most Victorian lady invalids were genuinely afflicted by poor health or simply suffering from boredom, depression, or the quiet mental collapse of living in an ornate cage. Sleeplessness, conveniently vague and socially acceptable, became the perfect affliction. You were not mad, you were not angry, you were merely unrested. And so you chart your wellness like a ship's captain, noting wind direction stars and stormy moods. You keep track of dreams, record meal contents, even sketch the angle of sunlight from your bedroom window. You've read somewhere that lunar phases may influence sleep, so now the moon too gets a mention in your journal. You hear someone mention your name from the drawing room, your niece asking if you'll come outside. It's a rare burst of sunlight today, rare enough that you agree. A short walk in the garden you've read is good for the nerves. The air is crisp and damp, heavy with the scent of soil and smoke. You stroll among the hedgerows with gloved hands folded. The trees are beginning to bud tiny green promises that winter does not last forever. You sit on the bench near the arbor and close your eyes. Not to sleep, heavens no, but just to listen. A bird trills nearby. The gravel crunches under the gardener's boots. The sun warms your cheek like a gentle hand. And you wonder maybe this too is part of the cure. You return inside with dirt on your shoes and a slight flush to your face. You feel, if not sleepy, then something close content. After lunch, fish pie and treacle pudding both passable, you retreat to the parlor to read. Nothing daring. Just a biography of an obscure duchess who once claimed to sleep 16 hours a day, much to the annoyance of her footman. You laugh aloud. 16 hours, you'd settle for 6. That afternoon, you experiment again. This time, a variation lettuce simmered with mint and a splash of lemon peel. A daring choice. The cook looks at you like you've gone mad. You ignore her. You drink it slowly, letting each spoonful coat your tongue, its temperature perfectly lukewarm, the culinary equivalent of a lullaby. You do not expect miracles, but you do expect peace. And that's enough for now. Not sheep, not stars. You count the herbs listed in Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management. Chamomile, valerian, lemon balm, hops, skullcap. You make it to 13 before you begin to drift your mind looping around the word skullcap and wondering if it's a flower, a potion, or a hat for monks. Maybe all three. It doesn't matter. The specifics are fading. This is the gateway now, where thoughts begin to blur and blend, where words lose their edges and become soft pools you can step into. You let your body sink into the mattress as though it's a gentle bog, and you're a frog prince politely declining his crown. There's a warmth now behind your eyelids, a hum behind your ears. The lettuce is working. Or maybe it's the ritual. Or maybe it's just that at long last you've grown too tired to care. Either way, you begin to dream. It starts with a garden. Not your own, but some fanciful version of it. The hedges are trimmed into the shapes of famous authors, and the flowers nod approvingly when you pass. You sit on a velvet bench made of marzipan and feed a goat that speaks Latin. Everything smells like cinnamon and calm. You have made it. Section 5. Tonight, the candlelight has a golden softness that makes the brass mirror glow, and your nightgown seem almost regal, if slightly threadbare. You trace your fingers across the porcelain wash basin, now empty and dry, and draw the curtains with your usual slow pull. The garden outside is veiled in mist. Somewhere beyond the hedges, a fox calls out sharp, eerie, but strangely distant. It's comforting in a wilderness sort of way. The lettuce soup was consumed dutifully an hour ago this time, with a sprig of mint and a few hushed expectations. It tasted like it always does, as though it wants to be tea but can't quite commit. You chased it with one biscuit plain and a small book of haiku. You sit for a moment combing your hair. 100 strokes slow and rhythmic. Not for beauty, but for routine. The sound of bristles pulling through your curls is as calming as the tick of your mantle clock. You reflect on how many women are at this very moment performing these same rituals. You are not alone in this twilight choreography. Across the empire, ladies are drinking sleepy teas, rubbing lavender into their temples, and reading just enough of a dry novel to make their eyes droop. There's a camaraderie in that, a collective bedtime performance of sleepy hopefulness. But of course, sleep is never guaranteed. You've tried everything. Early dinners, warm slippers, breathing exercises, counting buttons on your dressing gown. A friend once suggested sleeping on your left side, only as she claimed right-side sleeping led to fever dreams and ill digestion. You tried it for 3 nights and woke each morning with a stiff neck and a rising hatred of pillows. You remember your grandmother's advice, sleep comes only when it isn't invited. Ignore it, she said, and it'll follow you around like a stray dog. Historians still argue whether these old wives' tales were passed down as legitimate cures or simply inherited superstitions dressed in petticoats. Either way, they linger like perfumes, mildly ridiculous, oddly comforting, and impossible to fully abandon. You blow out the candle. Darkness. And then the quiet tick of the night clock begins again, measuring not time, but waiting. You lie still, one arm outside the covers. The cat once again makes his appearance, curling into the crook of your knees with absolute certainty that this bed belongs to him more than to you. You envy his arrogance. Sleep does not arrive. Not yet. Instead, you begin to imagine your room not as a chamber in your house, but as a vessel afloat. You picture the wallpaper turning to sails, the armoire as ballast, the window as a porthole to a star-speckled sea. Your bed becomes a little ship bobbing gently through tides of thought. You are no longer confined by linen and lace, but carried by imagination alone. This is a game you play often. Some nights you sail through the clouds, others across icy tundras. Tonight it's a slow drift down a moonlit river past willows and reeds and tiny frogs who wear spectacles and read philosophy aloud. You smile half asleep, but the world insists on one more interruption. A carriage passes outside, wheels clicking over cobblestones. You recognize the timing must be the theater crowd returning late. For a moment you imagine the driver bundled in wool humming softly to stay awake, guiding his sleepy horses homeward. You wonder if he too has his own version of lettuce soup. Probably not. Probably gin. You turn over again. The blanket has twisted, and the cat grumbles as you disturb his throne. You gently shush him, as if he too might be lulled back into contentment by your soft apology. You decide to count. Section 6. You wake gently, not with a jolt, but the way a feather might settle on a windowsill, lightly, silently, and entirely by accident. It's not yet full morning. There's a blush of gold in the sky, and the birds are debating something urgent outside your window. The cat is gone again. He always slips away just before dawn, perhaps to file his taxes or lead a secret double life as a pub regular. You feel better than you expected, not energized. Heavens no, that would be unrealistic. but there's a delicate clarity behind your eyes, like a fog has thinned just enough to see the outline of trees. You think that blasted lettuce might actually be doing something, but you dare not say it aloud. As you sit up, you recall fragments of your dream, the Latin-speaking goat, the velvet bench, the sweet smell of cinnamon. Dreams always fray at the edges by morning like a well-worn handkerchief, but the feeling lingers soft as a sigh, a rare and glorious thing. You pad across the floor and peek out the window. A milk cart rattles by. A neighbor's child runs after a hat caught in the breeze. The sky is powdered blue with streaks of apricot, and for a moment you feel victorious. This, you think, is the reward, not just sleep, but waking without resentment. You pull on your dressing gown and descend the stairs. The kettle is already on, your maid bless her, and you decide to skip tea and go straight for broth. Yes. Another bowl of lettuce soup. You're on a roll now, 3 nights in a row with actual dozing. Might as well lean into the madness. Historians still debate whether Victorian women believed in their home remedies because they worked or because they needed them to. And perhaps the truth doesn't matter. Belief, after all, has its own healing properties. You certainly didn't expect to become a lettuce evangelist, but here we are. You sip the soup slowly, watching steam curl like ghost ribbons toward the window. It's not delicious, but it's oddly satisfying, like participating in an ancient secret ritual passed down by generations of sleepless women. Later that morning, you browse your modest library in search of fresh reading material for tonight's pre-sleep strategy. The key you found is to pick something interesting enough to engage your mind, but not so thrilling that it revs your engine. Biographies are ideal. You select a musty volume about Lady Hester Stanhope, a British aristocrat who became a desert explorer, once smoked opium with Bedouins and declared herself Queen of the East. You read a few pages by the window. Her story is magnificent, absolutely the wrong book for bedtime. You put it down. Instead, you retrieve your battered copy of the English cookery book, circa 1850. There's something about reading old recipes aloud to yourself that soothes your nerves. You try this now in your calmest possible voice. To pickle walnuts, gather the walnuts while still green before the shell hardens within. Your cat looks vaguely alarmed, but you continue murmuring instructions for potted eel blancmange and the ideal suet pudding. You imagine a Victorian kitchen bustling with servants' copper pots clanging, and a scullery maid falling asleep standing up with a wooden spoon in her hand. And you think, at least I'm not elbow-deep in eel jelly. You feel grateful for your relatively restful life, not exciting perhaps, but steady. And in that steadiness you find space for experiments, for small comforts, for lettuce soup and long naps, and the occasional existential conversation with a biscuit tin. In the afternoon, you try another trick from the era, sitting in the garden with a blanket over your knees and a warm stone tucked under your feet. Supposedly it grounds the body and aligns the internal humors, whatever those are. You close your eyes, face turned to the sun, and let the warmth seep into your bones. Do you feel sleepy? Not quite. But do you feel less frayed? Absolutely. That evening, you prepare a fresh batch of lettuce broth, this time with a single clove for depth, as you explain to your maid, who has long since stopped questioning your soup alchemy. The smell is peculiar but not unpleasant. You serve it in your favorite bowl, the one with tiny painted violets around the rim, and sip it while watching the lamplighter make his rounds outside. There's something ceremonious about it now, like a bedtime sacrament. You even lay out a clean nightgown, tuck a lavender sachet into your pillow, and smooth your bedsheets with the care of a hotel maid preparing for royalty. You're not tired yet, but you will be. You believe it now in your bones and your soup-stained soul. And that's what matters. This time the dreams are quieter. A stroll through an apple orchard where the fruit hums lullabies. A conversation with a cloud about historical inaccuracies and weather almanacs. You float past a carousel made of honey and gingerbread where every horse is reading a newspaper. Somewhere in the distance, a Victorian lady in a lace cap nods approvingly. She too knows the power of a good sleep ritual. Perhaps she invented the lettuce broth. Perhaps she'll haunt your kitchen if you ever stop making it. You wake once more briefly at what must be 3:17 a.m. The room is silent but warm. Your limbs feel like pudding, and even your thoughts come slowly like molasses dripping from a spoon. You smile into your pillow. It's working. All of it. The soup, the second sleep, the absurd books and quiet rituals. This sleepy life built one dreamy brick at a time is becoming your own kind of sanctuary. Outside, the world continues, chilly streets and soot-stained chimneys and carriages waiting beneath gas lamps. But here in your little bedroom, cocoon time bends around you. Sleep doesn't arrive on command, but like a shy visitor, it keeps returning, if only because you've made it feel welcome. Section 7. Later that night, as the house sighs into its familiar hush, you light your single bedside candle and pause to admire its reflection dancing gently across your bedroom wall. It's a private little theater of shadows performing just for you. The cat is already curled into a tight pastry on your pillow, claiming his spot like a sleepy crown prince. You don't have the heart to move him. Instead, you roll a towel and call it a pillow. The sacrifices we make for those we love. Tonight's soup was perhaps your best yet, an earthy concoction steeped longer with a hint of rosemary. You might be imagining it, but it felt deeper, like a lullaby in a bowl. The Victorians you recall believed rosemary strengthened the brain and calmed nerves. And since you're not particularly invested in modern objections, you've decided to trust them. If it's good enough for an 1850s widow with 12 children and an overactive imagination, it's good enough for you. You lie down. Breathe. The sheets are cool. The air smells faintly of starch and mothballs, and the ceiling above looks exactly like the sails of a galleon if you squint. And sure enough, you begin to sail again. Tonight's voyage takes you through dreams of teacups and library ladders. Your mind drifts from floating parlors to gingerbread townhouses. You barely notice the transition from thought to dream, just that a moment ago you were wondering whether one could embroider a pillow with sleep advice, and now you're arguing softly with a nightingale about etiquette in a cloud-shaped drawing room. Sleep is for the most part cooperative. But then, because life is a theater with poorly trained stagehands, you're yanked from this dreamscape by the sharp clatter of something in the kitchen. You freeze. Did a plate fall? Is the cat hunting rogue biscuits? You listen. Nothing. Just the refrigerator's ancient rattle and the odd tick from the radiator. You sigh, roll over, and mumble an apology to the dream nightingale who had just poured you a cup of invisible tea. This is the nature of Victorian sleep, interrupted, episodic, and deeply ritualized. Historians still debate whether people in the 1800s actually experienced what they called first sleep and second sleep, two distinct stretches of nighttime rest, separated by a brief period of quiet wakefulness. Some evidence suggests they did. Letters and diaries from the era are littered with mentions of middle-of-the-night reading, prayer, sewing, or even mild snacking before returning to bed for the second act of their nightly rest. You smile at the idea. Suddenly, your own interrupted sleep feels like a vintage luxury. You're not broken, just old-fashioned. Maybe you'll bring second sleep back into vogue along with chamber pots and antimacassars. You light your candle again and reach for the small volume of dry prose you keep by the bed. Specifically for these occasions, a brief history of hedge-laying in Shropshire. It does not disappoint. Within minutes, you're knee-deep in descriptions of interweaving hawthorn branches and regional variations in hedge angles. It is both bizarrely fascinating and magnificently boring. Perfect. Eventually, your eyes begin to droop again. You dog-ear the page, not out of disrespect, but in sleepy reverence, and return to your slowly cooling bed. The cat has shifted to the warm spot you left behind. You nudge him with royal diplomacy, and he grumbles, then settles beside you with a defeated flop. You pull the covers to your chin and whisper one last thought before the second wave of dreams arrives. Please, no more talking birds tonight. And sleep returns. You make a note to add your soup recipe to the inside cover of your own copy. The rest of the day moves in hushed tones. You mend a stocking. You walk aimlessly around the garden, hands behind your back like a reflective philosopher or a retired sea captain. You notice how sunlight filters through the hedges, how the breeze smells faintly of lilac and ink. You pretend not to hear the neighbor's piano scales played for the 100th time today with heroic enthusiasm, but very little progress. After lunch, if a single pickled egg and a biscuit counts, you decide it's time to prepare for tonight's rest. That means more than soup, that means ambiance. So you set about crafting your bedroom into a Victorian sleep temple. A soft cloth over the lamps, a warm brick wrapped in flannel placed under the sheets. A few drops of lavender oil on your wrists, which may be historically inaccurate but feel spiritually aligned. You even revive the pre-sleep quiet hour, a common practice among the genteel set. It was meant to prepare the mind and body for slumber, not with reading or tasks, but simply stillness. Perhaps a soft tune from the pianoforte. Perhaps a bit of embroidery or idle sketching. You don't own a pianoforte, and your embroidery looks like a chicken had an episode on burlap, but you sit quietly nonetheless, watching dusk descend in that slow, imperceptible way it always does. You remember a passage from an old journal, Lady Arabella Trowbridge, 1848, who wrote, "The hours just before sleep belong to no one. They drift like feathers and mustn't be disturbed." You don't know what else Lady Arabella believed in, possibly phrenology or the medicinal power of smoked herrings, but you agree with her on this one. The hours before sleep are sacred. You light your candle, pull back the coverlet. Whisper your nightly threat to the cat about pillow real estate. Then, as you sip your now routine mug of lettuce soup tonight with a suspiciously luxurious glug of bone broth, you lean back against your pillow and exhale. The flickering light makes everything look a bit golden and soft around the edges, as though the room itself is remembering a better version of the day. You feel proud in a deeply gentle way. You're building something. Not a life of productivity, not a temple of results, but a patchwork quilt of small comforts stitched together over quiet days. You are becoming the kind of person who sleeps, and soon, perhaps even tonight, you'll believe it without question. Section 8. Morning creeps in again, not rudely, but with the subtlety of a cat burglar rearranging your furniture ever so slightly. Light curls at the edges of your curtains, the floorboards stretch. Somewhere a kettle whistles far away in someone else's kitchen. You've had some sleep. Not perfect, not textbook, but definitely sleep. That alone feels like a minor miracle. You stretch and feel the warm ache of a body that has rested at least partially. It's enough to tempt a quiet, triumphant smile. Today you decide to double down on your Victorian strategies. You're going full 1850s housewife. And not the drama-filled corset-fainting, scowling over a teacup kind. No, today you're the kind who hums while polishing the banister and refers to her cook as blessedly reliable. Breakfast is a slice of toasted bread with a thin layer of treacle. You eat it slowly, chewing in perfect silence. There is no radio, no phone, just the crackle of crust and the distant sound of someone sweeping their doorstep. Afterward, you consult your beloved copy of Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management, which is less a book and more of a sprawling life manifesto. It contains instructions for everything from poaching haddock to calming hysterics. In a particularly entertaining margin note, someone, perhaps a previous owner, has scrawled, "For heaven's sake, ignore page 947. The poultice exploded." You take it as a sign to skip page 947. Instead, you land on a charming section titled Soothing Dishes for Frail Nerves. It recommends barley water, milk jelly, and a peculiar tonic made with violets. Lettuce soup is notably absent, which briefly offends you, but you recover. You know a trendsetter when you see one, and clearly you are well ahead of your time. Historians still argue whether most Victorian women genuinely believed in the medicinal power of these home remedies, or whether they used them as a form of quiet rebellion, small rituals of self-preservation in a world that rarely asked how they were sleeping. Either way, it's empowering to imagine these rituals passed from woman to woman, whispered between doorways, written in cramped script into cookbooks already stained with years of gravy and candle wax. You awaken to the most Victorian sound imaginable, the distant clip-clop of horse hooves on cobblestone. There are no horses on your street, not in this century, but in your dream they were delivering lavender by carriage and complaining about the weight of their bonnets. One even tipped his hat to you. The morning is gentle again. A curtain billows. A bird performs a hesitant solo. You stretch beneath the blankets and feel a mild soreness in your ankles from yesterday's heroic walk to the grocer. It's the kind of ache that says you are alive, you did something, and no one expects more today. You begin, as always, with your tea. This morning it's chamomile brewed in a mug you insist on calling a china cup because it sounds more respectable. You drink it while seated upright, shawl around your shoulders, staring pensively out the window, as though expecting news from a distant relative or waiting for a ghost to visit. Today's mission is rest. Not just the sleeping kind, but the deeper, richer Victorian kind, what they called repose. Rest was an art form back then. People didn't just collapse into bed with their phones blaring nonsense into their ears. No, they prepared for rest with the solemnity of a religious rite. You do the same. Your morning is filled with restful activity, quiet journaling, rearranging your handkerchief drawer, and staring deeply into a blue and white saucer for inspiration. You wonder how many saucers were stared into in the 1800s by equally tired souls wondering how to get just one more decent night's sleep. Historians still debate how much of the Victorian obsession with rest was real concern and how much was clever marketing after all. Entire industries grew around sleep remedies, opium-laced teas, vinegar-scented pillows, sedative syrups, vibrating chairs, and somniferous corsets. We wish we were joking. Some remedies worked, others well. Let's just say people were probably too dizzy to notice they still weren't sleeping. You briefly consider constructing a somniferous corset, then immediately abandon the idea in favor of something more within reach, a good soak. The Victorian bath was not a daily occurrence. It was a ritual. Hot water, herbs, privacy, and occasionally the thrilling suggestion of a goose feather brush. You fill your tub with the modern equivalent scented salts, a non-Victorian bubble bath labeled moon milk, and a sponge the size of a small ham. You soak, and drift. You imagine yourself in a tiled bathhouse in 1891 being serenaded by a string quartet hiding modestly behind the ferns. A lady in a frilly cap hands you a cup of valerian tea and asks if your nerves feel soothed. You reply with something poetic and vaguely European. When the water begins to cool, you emerge pink and wrinkled as a well-loved peach and wrap yourself in thick cotton. You smell like a herb garden that's seen things. It is time once again to prepare the sacred soup. Tonight's version includes a suspicious but intriguing addition: grated nutmeg. You've read that nutmeg was used in the 19th century as a sleep aid, although too much could allegedly cause hallucinations. You add the tiniest pinch and imagine the dreams it might bring, perhaps a polite centaur who critiques your embroidery, or a hedgehog who insists you inherit his manner. You stir slowly, lovingly. The soup is no longer just a dish. It's a signal to your body, a password to your subconscious, a sleepy lullaby you eat with a spoon. While it simmers, you write a simple letter. No phone, no inbox, no best regards, just ink and paper. You describe your day to someone you miss, even if that someone only exists in memory. This too is rest, a release of thoughts that might otherwise rattle around at 2 a.m., demanding your attention like bored mice. The soup is ready. You carry it to bed in a bowl that feels sacred now. You've designated it your official soup vessel, and heaven help anyone who uses it for cereal. You sip slowly, eyes closed. You are centuries old. You are timeless. You are a Victorian housewife on the verge of slumber, and nothing, not modern stress, not caffeine slip-ups, not noisy neighbors can stop you now. You finish your meal, rinse the bowl with exaggerated reverence, and tuck yourself in. You whisper to the cat, who purrs in reply. And then, because your rituals have become your superpower, you feel it. The descent. Your breath slows. Your limbs grow heavy. Your mind no longer races. It strolls. You dream not in chaos, but in chapters. There is order to your inner world now, a soft rhythm like lace unraveling gently across your pillow. Tonight you sleep, and you're not even surprised. Section 9. Section 10. Sleep has become a friend again. Not a fickle visitor that arrives at 4 a.m. wearing tap shoes, but a gentle companion who turns down the covers and hums softly as you drift off. Last night you even managed a full dream, something about Queen Victoria inviting you to a dinner party where the main course was soup and everyone wore lettuce hats. You awaken refreshed, not bouncing out of bed refreshed, but Victorian refreshed, meaning you sit up slowly, check your pulse, and decide not to faint today. A win. Today's agenda. Nothing ambitious. You're not conquering empires or organizing the spice drawer. You're embarking on a low-stakes culinary adventure, recreating a full light supper for delicate constitutions as recommended by the Lady's Own Cookery Book circa 1844. You flip through a copy or a modern PDF version, which isn't quite as romantic, but saves you from inhaling 180-year-old mildew and discover an array of eyebrow-raising options. Gruel of thin arrowroot sounds both sad and medicinal. Stewed cucumbers in milk makes you question whether anyone back then actually liked food. Eventually you land on a menu that sounds edible: a bit of boiled fish, some buttered toast, and of course lettuce soup to anchor it all. You read that some households believed warm lettuce before bed soothed not only the nerves but also nocturnal tremblings, which sounds terrifying until you realize it probably meant the 19th century version of Sunday scaries. Historians still argue whether these nighttime menus were truly about nutrition, or if they were simply expressions of deep-seated anxiety cloaked in good intentions. After all, many Victorians approached food the same way they approached emotion, gently, cautiously, and with at least one doily involved. You prep your meal in silence, chopping slowly, letting the rhythm of your knife keep pace with your breathing. There's no rush. The food will be ready when it's ready. The goal isn't sustenance, it's softness. The boiled fish, to your surprise, is tender and mild. You flake it with a fork and pretend you're dining aboard a transatlantic steamship seated beside a widowed duchess who's escaping scandal and gently weeping into her napkin. The toast crunches beautifully. You spread it with salted butter and close your eyes for a second, letting the flavor carry you somewhere simpler, somewhere candlelit. You light one now, candle not duchess, and set your tiny supper tray on a folded napkin at the foot of your bed. Victorian women didn't always eat in bed, but you feel certain at least a few did in secret. You raise your soup to them in solidarity. After the meal, you take a walk, not outside, but through your own rooms. You pretend you're inspecting the house like a proper lady of the manor, straightening picture frames, adjusting doilies, sniffing linens. It's both absurd and wonderful. You're not controlling your surroundings, you're gently communing with them. Eventually, you land beside your vanity table where a small journal awaits. The Victorians loved journaling, though their entries often read like either passive-aggressive sonnets or weather reports. You decide on a more honest style. You write, "Dear me, tonight was peaceful. The soup had a depth I didn't expect. I think I'm becoming someone who actually sleeps." You pause, then add, also the cat sat like a loaf for a full 15 minutes and I am healed. You tuck the journal away just as the light dims across your windowsill. There's an old phrase you recall from the sleep manual published in 1885. To court sleep is to acknowledge the wisdom of surrender, which frankly sounds like something a nap enthusiast embroidered onto a pillow. But it sticks with you. You've learned over these days of lettuce and lace that sleep isn't something to be conquered, it's something to be invited. And the invitation must be sincere, wrapped in ritual, sealed with stillness. So you begin yours again. You warm the brick at the foot of the bed. You fluff the pillow just right. You play a soft record, something faintly classical, barely more than a suggestion of melody. You whisper to the walls, to the soup pot, to the memory of Mrs. Beeton and Lady Arabella, and every insomniac who ever found comfort in something simmered slowly with care. The candle burns low. You climb into bed with the slow, deliberate grace of a Victorian heroine on page 243 just before the resolution. You sip from a tiny cup of warm water with lemon balm. You sigh in contentment. And the moment you pull the covers over your shoulders, you feel it. The world grows quiet, not in absence, but in ease. You think briefly about the fact that some 19th century doctors prescribed lettuce not only for sleep, but also to cool passions of the blood. You chuckle. Maybe that's why it works. You let that thought drift away as your eyes begin to close, not out of desperation, but because you've finally built a world where closing them feels like the natural conclusion to the day. You are no longer the person who lies awake counting regrets. You're the one who simmers broth, adjusts pillows, and surrenders not in defeat, but in deep, sweet triumph. You sleep. Historians still argue whether these so-called mental tonics were effective therapy or just elaborate excuses to avoid the neighbor's children. You begin your own version with a leisurely reread of an old book. Not a thriller. Nothing with a plot, really, just a charming guide to flower meanings or Victorian kitchen arrangements. You pause frequently to savor a sentence like a piece of caramel. One phrase describes a suitable sleeping chamber as being drizzled in shadows like a room carved from dusk. You almost cry. You set the book down and stare into space for a solid 12 minutes. The cat yawns in approval. Then it's time for a little handcraft. You've started embroidering a modest design, a lettuce mid-swoon reclining on a silk chaise. You've nicknamed it Portrait of a Sleeping Vegetable. Each stitch is slow, a meditation in thread. You suspect you're not actually making progress, but in Victorian terms, progress was less about results and more about dignity. And dignity, my friend, is found in the tension of a well-threaded needle. Halfway through your stitching, you pause to prepare what Victorians might have called a tonic luncheon. Something light, simple, untroubled by seasoning. You go with oatcakes, a slice of chilled apple, and a small cup of bone broth, the kind of meal that doesn't demand your full attention so you can dream while chewing. You chew slowly, staring out the window as if awaiting a telegram. None arrives, but the act of waiting feels profound. After lunch, a new ritual, the constitutional. Not a document, but a walk, preferably slow, aimless, and dressed in far too many layers for the weather. You wrap yourself in a shawl, even if you're indoors, especially if you're indoors. Then you pace gently through your home, tracing the same worn path that thousands of Victorian women might have trod before you, pausing to sniff a geranium, to adjust a curtain tassel, or to mentally redecorate the drawing room using only items in arm's reach. Along your route, you come upon a forgotten basket of buttons. You run your fingers through them. They clack like tiny teacups. You imagine they each contain a story, a lost cloak, a wedding gown, and an especially fancy pair of gardening trousers. You select one and place it in your palm like a talisman. It becomes your mascot for the evening. His name is Gerald. As evening nears, you find yourself planning dinner without ever quite realizing it. Your thoughts drift to soup, of course, your dependable bedtime companion. But perhaps tonight's version wants company. A custard, maybe, or a faintly sweet milk pudding, as one 1872 cookbook promises, soothing to the humors and pleasing to the female disposition. You stir milk gently in a saucepan, watching the surface ripple like a lazy lake. You add a drop of rose water. The room fills with a scent that makes you feel 47% more aristocratic. You set it aside to cool, then return your attention to the soup. This one features delicate herbs and just a hint of barley because you've read somewhere that barley was once considered a sedative grain. Whether that's science or superstition, you don't care. At this point, you would happily believe a chamomile-scented hat could cure insomnia. You eat slowly by candlelight. Not because of a power outage, but because artificial lighting now feels gauche. The flicker of flame makes your kitchen look like an oil painting. You half expect a footman to materialize and ask if you require more toast. You do. The toast is divine, full and content. You slip into your evening robe, a vaguely dramatic garment that swishes as you move, adding a touch of theater to bedtime. You light a small bundle of lavender and fan the smoke gently around the room, murmuring something that could pass for an incantation, or perhaps just a poem about soup. As the hour turns gentle and the house grows still, you sit at your vanity one last time. You dab your pulse points with rose water. You brush your hair the recommended 100 strokes, stopping somewhere around 30 because your arm gets tired. The point, after all, is not perfection, it's pacing. You jot a final line in your journal. Today I stitched lettuce, ate barley, and named a button Gerald. I believe I am healing. And you are. Section 11. Morning unfolds gently with the sound of soft rain tapping at your window and a faint sense that something important happened in your dreams, possibly involving a marmalade magnate and an argument over the correct number of buttons on a tea gown. You stretch, not the frantic, I'm late kind of stretch, but the long cat-like sprawl of someone who's becoming a connoisseur of repose. Your joints pop like well-oiled hinges and you murmur something in Victorian, which translates roughly to another day to do almost nothing splendid. Today, your focus turns to the mind. The Victorians, bless them, believed rest wasn't just about lying still, it was also about cultivating mental tranquility. This didn't mean reading political pamphlets or arguing over empire in the parlor. No. For the genteel housewife, it meant puzzles, embroidery, quiet observation of flowers, and if you were very daring, a slow stroll while considering the moral character of hedgehogs. Section 12. You sleep that night like a character in a Jane Austen novel who's finally been released from emotional tension. No toss, no turn, just one long drift into quiet, nothing like a handkerchief falling in slow motion. Morning arrives with the smell of something subtle. Perhaps your lavender bundle. Perhaps the ghost of last night's soup, lingering like a memory too polite to leave without saying goodbye. You rise slowly. There is no Victorian emergency today. No silver to polish, no cousin arriving with scandal in tow. You're free to ease into your next small but sacred ritual, the evening bathing routine anticipated all day, like a tiny personal holiday. Now, when you think of a bath today, you probably envision steaming water, some bath bombs, and the low, confident tones of a lo-fi playlist. Not so for the Victorian housewife. Theirs was a bathing experience best described as cautious. Public plumbing was hit or miss. Water had to be heated in kettles poured by hand and maintained at a temperature just shy of lukewarm optimism. The bathtubs themselves were frequently tin or wood-lined and offered about as much comfort as sitting inside a soup pot, which ironically you now find rather on theme. Still, bathing was cherished, especially before bed. A light warm wash was believed to calm the nerves, settle the digestion, and purify the day's energy, or at least remove the faint scent of boiled cabbage. Tonight you're doing your own take on it. The bathroom may be modern, but the vibe will be entirely 1850s. You prepare the setting like a stage. You light 3 candles, not 2. 3 feels like the correct number for a ceremony of self-care with just a dash of the mystical. You place a hand towel near the tub, not folded but gently draped like a swan that's slightly had enough. You mix a bit of milk and rose water into the water, remembering how Victorians believed this softened the skin and made one more agreeable to the touch, which feels both slightly romantic and oddly specific. Historians still debate whether these bathing rituals were born of hygiene or simply longing for control, for peace, for a moment alone in a world of tightly corseted expectations. You lower yourself into the tub, slowly savoring the contrast of warm water and cool air. The sensation is immediate. Your shoulders untense, your breath deepens, and your thoughts stop galloping quite so loudly across the field of your mind. For a brief moment, you consider reciting poetry aloud, something by Christina Rossetti or Elizabeth Barrett Browning. But instead you hum a tune you don't recognize. Maybe it's one your great-great-grandmother knew while scrubbing her elbows and dreaming of less squeaky corsets. Time in the bath melts. You think about how some women in the 19th century took to bedroom bathing, a gentle sponge down beside the hearth, discreetly veiled behind a screen. It was considered modest, private, and very slightly rebellious. You smile at the thought. Privacy itself in those times was an act of quiet power. When the water cools, you step out and wrap yourself in a towel warmed near the radiator, your modern cheat for the Victorian airing cupboard. You pat yourself dry with the care of someone dabbing antique lace and slip into a long cotton nightdress that is quite honestly the most comfortable garment on earth. It may not be flattering, but it whispers of dreams. Your post-bath routine involves hair oil with a faint scent of neroli, a comb made to look Victorian, but thankfully not made of bone, and a few more drops of rose water behind the ears where dreams apparently like to nest. Back in the bedroom, the air is hushed. You notice the button from yesterday, Gerald, your mascot, still resting on the vanity. You place him beside your journal and decide you'll keep a collection. Every day, a new object, a feather, a spool of thread, a paperclip if you're feeling reckless. A tiny museum of serenity. Dinner is done. The bath is behind you. The hour turns mellow. And now comes one final ritual, a story. The Victorians adored storytelling before bed. Whether it was a chapter from a moral fable, a passage from the Bible, or the most recent serialized novel in the family periodical, the goal was always the same: to settle the spirit, to end the day, not with tasks unfinished or worries replayed, but with narrative, something with a beginning, middle, and end, something that reminds you even chaos has structure. You select a tale. Nothing dramatic, no monsters or murders. Just a quiet story about a boy who finds a snail in his garden and believes for an entire summer that it's a prince under a spell. He builds the snail a palace from matchboxes. He writes it poems. Eventually, the snail disappears and the boy is sad, but a part of him still believes. You close the book. Not everything has to be explained. Some things are just lovely. The candle flickers. You write tonight's journal entry. Tonight I bathed in silence and read about snails. I think my soul exhaled. And maybe it did. Section 13. Dawn arrives quietly, spilling pale light across your curtains like a soft whisper. You wake gently, feeling the lingering comfort of last night's bath and the tender hope nestled in your snail story. The day ahead is unhurried, and you welcome it with a slow, deliberate breath. As you sit by the window, you consider the Victorian practice of rest cures, a curious, oft-debated method prescribed to women who suffered from what they called nervousness or melancholia. These rest cures ranged from extended bed rest to strict isolation, sometimes paired with gentle massage or mild sedatives derived from plants. Historians still argue whether these treatments truly soothed or simply prolonged inactivity. But to you, the idea of deliberately slowing down seems oddly comforting. Your breakfast is a modest affair: porridge cooked to a creamy softness, sweetened with a drizzle of honey and a sprinkle of cinnamon. You imagine yourself in a 19th century kitchen where the morning light filters through lace curtains, illuminating copper pots and stacks of enamelware. The aroma of oats and spice feels like a warm embrace. You recall how Victorian housewives often kept detailed journals recording not just daily events, but their thoughts on health, sleep, and remedies. Inspired, you reach for your own journal and begin to jot down observations about your current sleep journey. You note the calming effect of rituals, the subtle magic of scent and touch, and the curious power of simple foods to lull the mind. Mid-morning, you embark on a gentle walk through a garden, real or imagined, where every leaf and petal seems infused with quiet stories. You picture Victorian gardeners carefully tending roses, dahlias, and lilies, often attributing specific emotional meanings to each bloom. The language of flowers or florography was a secret code, allowing people to express feelings too delicate for words. You pause before a bed of lavender, inhaling its soothing fragrance. You remember how lavender was prized not only for its scent, but also for its believed ability to ease headaches and promote restful sleep. You tuck a small sprig behind your ear, smiling at the invisible connection you share with those long-ago gardeners. Back inside, the afternoon drifts by with a slow unfolding of quiet activities: reading a chapter of light fiction, mending a torn handkerchief, and preparing a simple tea infusion of chamomile and lemon balm. Each task is performed with care and intention, a gentle reminder that rest is as much about presence as it is about repose. As evening approaches, you prepare your familiar lettuce soup. Its mild flavors comforting and familiar. You eat slowly, savoring each spoonful as the sky outside softens into shades of pink and gold. The day's rhythms settle into a soothing cadence, a lullaby woven from food scent and soft light. You close the day with gratitude for these small, nurturing moments, and anticipation for the gentle sleep ahead. The Victorian housewife within you smiles, quietly pleased with the care you've given yourself. Section 14. The night deepens like a velvet curtain drawn gently across the sky. You find yourself once again nestled in your favorite spot, wrapped in soft linens, the faint scent of lavender lingering like a whispered promise. Your mind drifts back to the peculiar but tender world of Victorian bedtime customs, where every small act was a thread in the delicate fabric of restful sleep. You recall the practice of light reading before bed, a ritual designed to ease the mind without stirring the imagination too vigorously. Victorian housewives often turned to poetry, gentle essays, or moral tales, carefully avoiding anything too dramatic or exciting. Historians still argue whether this was more about preserving propriety or genuinely helping the restless mind. Tonight, you pick up a volume of lullabies and folk tales, their verses simple yet soothing. You read aloud softly, your voice barely above a whisper, the words floating around you like a lullaby breeze. There's a gentle humor in some lines, like the tale of the donkey who accidentally wore a lady's bonnet to the market, and it makes you smile without breaking the calm. As the candle flickers low, you think about the role of music in Victorian evenings. Harp and piano melodies were often played at a whisper, creating an atmosphere of serenity. You imagine a faint strain of a nocturne floating through a lace-curtained room, weaving a spell of tranquility. You try humming a few bars yourself, noticing how the gentle vibration in your throat seems to steady your breath and slow your thoughts. Music, it seems, was more than decoration. It was a balm. Your thoughts wandered to the night air outside, the cool, damp scent of cobblestones and gas lamps, the distant clatter of horse hooves. You imagine Victorian women pulling shawls tight, strolling the quiet streets for fresh air to combat restlessness wrapped in the soft glow of street lamps. The idea of night walks indoors in quiet corridors or drawing rooms also feels comforting. These gentle movements were believed to soothe digestion and calm nerves without the risk of overexertion. You adjust your pillows and settle deeper into the warmth of your bed, feeling a tender kinship with those women, long gone, connected through shared rituals of comfort and care. Your final act before surrendering to sleep is to jot a line in your journal, a quiet reminder of your journey. Tonight I read, hummed and dreamed with shadows. Rest is an art practiced patiently. And with that, you close your eyes.